Say hello. I'm an astrologer. His name is Patrick Watson. He is also an astrologer. And this is the Astrology Livestream. Welcome back, and welcome to our February 2024 forecast episode. How you doing, Watson? He asked him
Um,
mid-sip.
I'm doing well. I really enjoyed we had our first watch party yesterday with our cosmic tier of Patreon supporters. We watched A Fish Called Wanda over Amazon Prime Video watch party, which is a cool feature. We kind of got to speak over live chat while watching the film, and then afterward we met up on Zoom and sort of had discussion of the film's astrology, and it was actually really interesting and deeper than you'd think. So we're going to be doing that on the fourth Saturday of each month. So join us on our
Yes,
Patreon if you would like to be involved.
I was really, this was your idea, and I went along with it. I wasn't sure what to make of it at first, and then we put the vote out to our patrons. We gave them a choice of 5 movies. And A Fish Called Wanda was really kind of a random choice. It was something that we knew was available, but wouldn't be available for much longer. And I think when we chose it, we just had, oh yeah, maybe we'll talk about Monty Python horoscopes, and we just show this movie and then talk about Python. But then we realized, like, first of all, we have time charts for the 4 principal actors in the movie: John Cleese, Michael Palin, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Kevin Kline. Oh wow, that's great. But I also realized I had Michael Palin's diaries. He published over 2 decades worth of diaries. I think like 25 years worth of diaries covering the whole Monty Python period, but also his career through the 80s into the early 90s. So I had diary entries about the production of the movie, and I was able to make some charts that really gave us insight into the like how the cast met, and when they were rehearsing for the film. So not just the release of the film, but the shooting of the film, the rehearsal, the chemistry between the actors behind the scenes. So we had a lot of really great astrology that we were able to use for this, and I think it set a template for how we're going to proceed with these movie nights. Because like any movie we watch, it's fun to watch a good movie with people and comment while the movie's playing, but just as an astrology lesson, it winds up taking on a whole other life of its own. So I was really pleasantly surprised. Thank you so much for introducing this to our. It was a great idea. I mean, obviously we are doing it to seduce people into becoming our patrons, our Patreon subscribers. Because only they get to avail themselves of this wonderful feature that we're offering. But sign on up. It's great astrology. It's not just watching a movie. It's a lot of great astro learning. All right. So besides that, how you doing?
That was all I was prepared to say.
Oh,
How are you doing, Nick?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm likewise. I guess I'll be repeating myself now. I'm likewise pleased with how things went yesterday. So,
Yeah,
all right. Well, onward. It's January 28th. There's only 3 days left in January, and then we're into February of
man, that
2024.
Mercury-Mars conjunction, huh? That
Yeah, yeah.
there was some real interesting manifestations of that. If you've seen social media lately, especially on Twitter, I'm not calling it by that other name. It's rough out there. Everyone's gotta remember to be kind during these kinds of alignments.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
won't
No,
comment much more than that, but
yeah, no, I get you. I get you. Of course, that Mercury-Mars conjunction was the third of a series of Mercury-Mars conjunctions we've been having since December, because there was a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Sagittarius before Mercury went retrograde, and then another one in Sagittarius while Mercury was retrograde back in late December after Christmas, and so now this was like sort of the completion of this really long drawn out. I mean, this is what retrogrades wind up doing, amongst other things, is they sort of draw out these transits. So typically, a Mercury-Mars conjunction should be something that happens in a day, and at best sort of like has an impact on a week. But this is really something that's been drawn out and therefore more intensified, given more time to fester and get a little sicker, I'd say.
right. One of the things we had said last time about Mercury-Mars conjunctions is that they could make sense for things like cyber crimes or cyber attacks. And actually, just 3 days ago, the news has had stories about a massive hack of Russian force or Russian, basically a series of really astonishing cyber attacks between Ukraine and Russia, which seem to have escalated just in the past few days. So I thought that was an interesting correspond. I mean, I'm sure some of these things have been happening over this whole time period, but then again, like you mentioned, Mercury has been in this sort of extended engagement with Mars, where there's been more of like this technological or cyber crimes basically being committed against people. So I hope that's not hitting people's charts too personally. You don't want to lose your data or get your passwords hacked.
Right, exactly. All I can say is somewhere up in Orthodox heaven, someone is having to explain this to Catherine the Great, and she's just, what? What are cyber attacks? Okay. Yeah, no, that's, thankfully that's sort of wearing off, but now we're really, we're fully in Pluto and Aquarius season. Now, Pluto did make an ingress into Aquarius last year in 2023, and it was there for what, 60 something days, or it was there for a fairly short period of time. But it was after February that the ingress happened, and therefore it never made a conjunction to the sun, and it never made a conjunction to any other planet, really, other than the moon. The moon would have made a couple of conjunctions to that Pluto. However, this time around, things are a little more real.
There's many more conjunctions, to these. These are the first that have happened since the 19th century. So this is quite momentous in some ways.
18th century, my friend.
18th, pardon me.
18th century.
Well, that was when they first started happening, but they last happened.
But in Aquarius, Pluto left Aquarius in what, 1799, 1798, 1798.
Okay.
So
pardon
no,
me. I just figured it would have been like early 1800s. I can't beat the human ephemeris just yet.
Well, we covered this. We covered this in our Napoleon episode, right?
That's right.
He gets to Egypt just as Pluto's leaving.
That's right.
Aquarius.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. And also when Chris and I were talking about what we did, that episode on Pluto and Aquarius, and I pointed out that upon Pluto's ingress into Pisces in 1798, it was in early Pisces in 1799 when George Washington died.
Right.
And so there was a whole, going from Washington's presidency to John Adams, which was two very different. Adams, had a lot of issues, and it turned out to be a one-term presidency, and it was in a very, very contentious, sort of factionalized environment, as opposed to Washington's administration. So yeah, in American history, you also see that, that shift from Aquarius to Pisces, I think says something about, the United States of America that had George Washington, and then the United States of America that he left behind once he left. All right. So here we are. I don't know why I went into sort of Aquarius breadth thing, looking 20 years what we're in. And this planet conjunction, that's what we're really in store for. We'll transit Pluto through Aquarius for the next 20 something years.
So let's take a look at that. Oh, whoops. It looks like your connection's sort of going in and out or something. It was a bit garbled, at least on my end. Hopefully it's okay for the viewers.
Yeah, you know what? Everything to fix the over a bunch of times. It really almost screwed up my episode. Thankfully I recorded, and all I'm going to be on because it's just not working live streaming from here. I hope it doesn't interfere any more than it has already.
Yeah, I can. There might be some other things. I in fact, even though I'm right next to my router, I still have a wired connection going right to it, which gives me a little more reliability with Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I can do that here. I don't have that set up here. That's a
gotcha.
problem.
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
Okay. It's a no-go. Gotta go.
No worries.
I'll be in South Africa within a month or so, and have a whole new problem. But we've got five there. All right.
So why don't we take a look at that first conjunction that a planet
Yes.
makes to Pluto, which is Mercury on
Okay.
February 5th.
Yeah, I'm going to pull that up right now. And here we are. So yeah, 5th. So a week from Monday, there will be a Mercury-Pluto conjunction at 0 Aquarius.
This should also be relatively close to Mercury's heliacal setting, depending on where you are in the world.
Have you mapped that one out?
Not well. I have been trying to get it to work for other planets. So I haven't figured it out to the same extent that I have with Venus. But
Okay.
yeah, it's just a matter of switching out a few variables. So
Right.
this catches my eye because I have a Mercury-Pluto conjunction natally.
Oh, yes.
And so I keep track of those recurrences because they end up being very interesting for me. What are some of the things that come to your mind when you think of Mercury and Pluto as a combination and what it could mean in Aquarius?
Yeah, well, I mean, Chris and Austin were talking about how it's, reflective of obsessive investigation, and sort of revelations that come out of obsessive investigation. And I thought that was a pretty good one. But another one I think of is with the interaction of Mercury and Pluto makes me think of the exposure of children to dark forces in society, if you will. Children's interaction with darkness. Amongst other things, Mercury does signify children, and Pluto is just sort of the hazards of 20th century life, if you will.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting because I know that some states are considering like bans on social media for the young under a
Right.
certain age. So that would be interesting if that somehow accelerates around that time. Yeah, I mean, I certainly think of Mercury being kind of obsessive when it gets into Pluto, when it gets within range of Pluto.
Hmm.
I also think we just in general tend to see like a real intensification empowerment of mercurial significations. So if Mercury is about sort of ambiguity or fluidity or being kind of tricksy and unpinnable, then you sometimes see interesting crossovers happen when Mercury is conjunct Pluto. You sort of get turncoats and people who switch over to another side, sometimes on the sly, to be briefly allied with someone of the opposite sort of side of the aisle, as it were.
Hmm.
So it's sometimes this idea of like politics make strange bedfellows. So like there's a few examples of that where like um for example, both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush have Mercury-Pluto conjunctions, and like under two separate Mercury-Pluto conjunctions, they appeared together
Oh, wow.
to like raise money in for like relief efforts for hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. Those examples are kind of older, but we also had the Mercury Pluto. We had the Mercury retrograde conjunction with Pluto in late 2022, I believe. It was in the time frame where those two senators from the Democratic Party, Tim Manchin of West Virginia and Kristen
Okay.
Sinema of Arizona,
Right.
they kind of sabotaged the the voting rights essentially in the United States, sort of jumping in and jumping over to the other side. They're kind of defying their party assignment, as it were. You also get Mercury conjunct Pluto when the Supreme Court decided to hand Bush the presidency, and so you
Right.
had a small group of people sort of exercising an incredible amount of power. So I also think, when Mercury was conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, actually, that would have been when the Electoral College was first formed.
Yeah.
Which is again the idea of like concentrating sort of voting power into like a
Right.
smaller people. So it's not that democratic in some ways. It's about leveraging things in really powerful ways. And
Mm.
so I would think now this is a very quick transit. It's not like a retrograde or something, so it might not be as pronounced, but I would still think that we might see sort of important disclosures at that time, things which people are ways in which people are crossing a kind of barrier or boundary to be able to say, this can be make sense for something like a whistleblower report, or
Mhm.
you know um, someone on the inside, coming clean, and um, uh, so I would think about those types of developments with like Mercury, Pluto, and Aquarius. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm people are still wondering about things relating to the Jeffrey Epstein case. That's enough. When you're talking about children being exposed to darkness, that's one
Sure.
sort of facet of it. Although certainly it could be also children sort of speaking truth to power. Maybe we get testimony from Palestinian children about their experiences, or things of that nature. Children's voices being amplified. That's another thing. That's another sort of aspect of Pluto, is it relates to amplification, literal. The PA system, the creation of the PA system, arguably weaponized by Adolf Hitler, upon its invention, the ability to sort of speak to the masses in a way that it amplifies the human voice to greater frequencies and exposure to greater audiences. As it being a quick transit, I just want to say that certainly the Mercury Pluto conjunction comes and goes, but it is setting uh, Venus conjunctions that follow. So, in another sense, there is this sort of drawn out sense of uh, planets hitting Pluto in fairly quick succession, and that does draw the situation out, I think.
So Mercury is the announcer
Yeah,
of
yeah.
this sort of the herald of this kind of um, uh, entrance of Venus and Mars into that sign. Yeah, I like that idea. I also think of how Mercury can also generally have sort of technological significations, and Mercury has triplicity rulership in Aquarius, so it is understandable that there could be um, maybe like, especially since Aquarius has this kind of decentralizing um,
Hmm.
principle or connotation. I might think of like a really significant like open source AI project or something launching, on a day like this, or a kind of maybe a new type of encryption, for messaging services, or something along these lines, where it's about sort of empowering the the user, or empowering
Right.
speech and thought in kind of radical ways. So we'll yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be kind of interesting one, sort of a quick one, but
Yeah, one other observation is that when the U.S. Constitution was being ratified, Massachusetts was the state that ratified the U.S. Constitution while Mercury was conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. So, if anything sort of emerges relating specifically to Massachusetts in the Constitution, on or around Monday the 5th, that would be a very interesting recurrence transit indeed. So, just in terms of long shots, that's something else to keep
right.
in mind.
Well, another thing to keep in mind with that Mercury-Mars conjunction that we just had is the final, I guess because it was the final one in the series, I thought it was very interesting that the letter from the governor of Texas, Abbott, that
Mm.
came out right around the Mercury-Mars conjunction, where he basically seems to be stating that he's mobilizing his state's forces to um, um, take up arms against
Yep.
the government to enforce border security, and then a bunch of states sort of followed suit. So, in line with what you're saying, with Mercury conjoining Pluto and Aquarius and being a kind of recurrence of Massachusetts sort of commitment to the Union,
Hmm.
I would wonder if there may be a kind of parallel sort of effort on the other side to show like we're actually we're uniting sort of on this other side, but I don't like the way it looks, obviously.
Right.
Um,
Greg Abbott does have Pluto square Mercury in his natal chart.
mm,
We don't have a time for him, but we do know that much. So that's also interesting in and of itself. Okay. Shall we move on to the next one?
yes, yeah, sure.
All right. So we've got a new moon happening on the 9th, a week from this coming Friday. So yeah, just under 2 weeks from now. Sun moon at 20 Aquarius. This is squaring Uranus, so it's setting the course of the month for things to be a little volatile and revolutionary. I mean, particularly when you're combining, uh, um, a new moon in Aquarius. Sort of again, yeah, it speaks to sort of a greater collective, a decentralized greater collective, humanity with a capital H, and then squaring Uranus. Sort of the masses coming into some kind of revolutionary, some kind of twist in terms of where the zeitgeist is going, where people are thinking.
It's it reminds me a lot of the sort of Canadian trucker convoy protests that
Mm-hmm.
occurred while Saturn was in Aquarius, square Uranus and Taurus. There seems to be some sort of similar kind of development happening right now in Europe with these farmer protests.
Mm-hmm.
Dumping tons of setting government buildings on fire. This is all happening in France. Of
Right.
course, this is a very French type of alignment in some ways.
Yeah, the French Revolution, as we've been saying, is a very Pluto and Aquarius kind of thing. And this new moon, I mean, this is one thing that occurred to me is this new Aquarius. Like, it would be interesting to look at, where was Pluto at 20 Aquarius over the course of the French Revolution, and how does that relate to now?
Because what is it picking up, right?
So I'm going back to France here. Um,
While you're looking for that, one of the people we mentioned that could be implicated in the Pluto ingress was Bill Maher, and of course he was born with a Sun Uranus square.
yeah,
So
that's
it
true.
may,
It's a recurrence of him. Yeah,
so it's a recurrence transit for him as well as a degree based conjunction as well. So I'd assume that whatever he's doing at that point might be interesting to watch at the very least.
right. Okay, so Marie Antoinette was executed when Pluto was at 22. So really, we're going to like the Constitution of Year One, the established. Oh, that's even Pluto at 24, so it's a little bit early. Um, the first republic was proclaimed Pluto at 21 Aquarius opposite Uranus. So that's about as close as we get. So yeah, I think you're on the money with France, really.
Yeah. So that new moon is aligning with where that Pluto Uranus opposition happened, basically, in
Exactly.
that sort of
Exactly.
20 to 21
Yeah.
degrees of Leo and Aquarius. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of picking up that old baton. And in
Right.
general, I would think with the new moon square Uranus, this is going to be about people taking action regardless of what the consequences are. Usually it's like independence at any cost. It doesn't always make sense. There's often a lot of contradictions, oftentimes in protests. But I would also think there are many positive ways that could work out as well. I think that there are certainly, worthy causes to be protesting against right now, for human rights and so forth.
I wonder. Speaking of the French Revolution, I wonder also about Haiti, because Haiti also their rebellion, their revolution began in 1791 when Pluto was at 20 Aquarius. So yeah, it's really this is the. I mean, it is going back this far. It is waking up forces that echo from over 200 years ago, and these things that still resonate. I'm reading about where were Uranus and Neptune when they were at 20 Aquarius, which has happened in the last 20 years or so. right? I mean, let's see, 2005, Neptune was at 17, maybe around like Hurricane Katrina. Was that? Well, that was still 15. Maybe Obama. Is Obama 20 Aquarius?
He's in late Aquarius. So actually, that new moon will be hitting his ascendant almost.
No, but I mean the transit. Neptune was at 21. It was stationing
Right.
21 in November 2008 when he was elected. So I'm talking about
Mhm.
his ascendancy to the presidency. So the sun and
And
moon.
Neptune's position at that point, right?
Right. That's what I'm speaking to. And of course, Uranus had been there earlier, probably around the time of the 2000 election, if I remember correctly. Um, so yeah, this is bringing up. Am I right here? November. This is. Do I not have? Well, this is November of 2000. No, Uranus wasn't there yet. 11. Yeah, 9/11 Uranus was at 21 Aquarius.
Oh shoot. Huh.
Right. So they're pretty close.
Yeah. Well, the connection there actually is 84 years prior. Basically, the ingress of like Uranus from Aquarius into Pisces. Um, to me, I see I forget which date is the exact like return, but essentially Uranus was in the same place when the United States said we're not going to join the League of Nations, and
mm,
then like a Uranus return later, it is
right.
bucking the UN and saying no, we're going to go into Iraq anyway. Um,
Okay.
and
That
so
that
that's all taking place as Uranus is in the late degrees of Aquarius.
okay, that kind of tracks. I mean, but it seems a bit later because Wilson is campaigning for the League of Nations in the summer of 1919, which is like there had already been one Uranus ingress into Pisces in 1919, and then another would follow in 1920. So that seems a bit like, I mean, it's close, but I think it goes back more to, let's see if I go to American history here. Um, I'm thinking it might align more with around the time that the U.S. got involved in the war, right? In 1917. Yeah,
So
Uranus at 22 in 1917. So this is just after, uh, um, the Americans found out about the Zimmerman telegram and that the Germans were conspiring with Mexico with revolutionary Mexico to try and take back territory that the Americans had taken from them in the Mexican American War. So yeah, I think it ties more to U.S. involved First World War, and then of course 9/11, which led to American involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq. Um,
right. I'm
so,
just thinking
so
in the same time frame when Uranus is going through the late degrees of Aquarius, it's the same sort of sentiment. It's
right,
proclaiming, freedom and specifically against international schemes or orders.
yeah,
Because November 1919, Uranus was still in Aquarius
yeah,
at that point, which is when the
sure,
Senate,
yeah,
was first voting against doing it, and that's
yeah,
exactly what was happening in the lead up to the invasion of March 2003. So um, the I think that connection is valid, but
oh
yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah,
may not fall exactly at 20 degrees of Aquarius, but I think we can certainly see that connection in any case. That this sort of alignment, the new moon with Uranus speaks to this idea of basically it's a middle finger on the from the cosmos, right? It's just saying we're not we're not going to take this, from whatever perspective that comes. There'll be this idea of proclaiming your independence regardless if it makes sense, no matter who it displeases or pleases, etc. um
I see that someone says I was cutting in and out again. How do I seem now?
You seemed okay to me,
Okay.
more or
All right.
less.
Well, someone said I was cutting in and out again. I really regret that. For the time being, I'm stuck here and there's zero I can do and I'm very frustrated.
Uh,
Um,
Kai asked a good question. They're asking, speaking of long-term returns like Uranus and Pluto, do you use precession correction for those?
Not necessarily. I, I really take the tropical zodiac to be a fixed circle. My thing is that I like to keep track of the circle, right, correct precession. I accept that the tropical zodiac as this fixed grid. It's very deliberately unprecessed. It represents something that is very fixed. You, I look at nakshatras, which represent the shifting of groupings of stars or constellations as they shift with regard to precession. And I'd rather track that kind of movement in that kind of way, where you have a fixed grid and then another sort of circle that is precessing around it, as opposed to trying to shift the whole mechanism. I hope that's making sense. Um, am I making sense to you, Watson? And then hopefully
Yeah,
the audience
sure.
as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, sure. Yeah, I don't use precessional correction for the outers. I mean, it's minimal. Um, uh, I think with Pluto, it basically results in a difference of like 2 years, I guess. Although with Pluto being so slow, you're still looking at longer time frames for its sort of astrological effects. So it I think these different measurements probably have their own uses, but I think the tropical measurement is still correct for tropical reckoning. you know um uh, I wouldn't try to confuse it with precisional correction. I feel like if you're going to do that, then you might as well just consider that on its own kind of
yeah.
merits and just precess all the planets. But sometimes I'll also look at the heliocentric like conjunction, especially for like a long-term conjunction. Like, for example, Jupiter and Saturn kind of flirted with each other in late Capricorn into early Aquarius, right?
Hmm.
They didn't make three conjunctions, but the heliocentric conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 2020 took place on November 6th, I believe, of
The day of the
2020, the
election.
day of the election. Which is interesting to consider that the geocentric conjunction, like when it was actually visible to us on Earth, was like December 21st or so, right around the equinox, solstice, pardon me. And so I thought it was interesting. Then it sort of gives you a different perspective of the duration and the actual sort of temporal boundaries, I suppose, of that alignment when you take into account the geocentric and heliocentric coordinates. So it tells us like it isn't just December 21st. It's that it's that November December era. I think
Mm.
I think we like in our society. I think we like to have extremely well defined boundaries on some of these things, but reality refuses to be exactly like that. It's often squishier than that. Um,
Indeed. Indeed, indeed. Yeah, B. Haven says Mercury conjunct Pluto. A few thoughts: speaking truth to power, powerful propaganda, power over data, power taking data, power of data. Just the words that come to mind.
Data privacy, yeah, that
Yeah, or
makes
lack
sense.
thereof. Lack thereof.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
not sure about propaganda though. I tend to think of that more as like Mercury Neptune, like because
Mm.
it's deliberately trying to mislead or
It can. It can be.
glamorize or
It can be propaganda of a certain tone, again, it's Hitler at the microphone is Mercury Pluto. It's the
I
voice of
I we need a you need a better a better analogy.
why?
But
Why? Why?
oh,
The
oh,
it
so
the
Behaven says censorship That's an interesting thing, which I think will come up actually a little later in the month, specifically at the end. Um, I think censorship is different from like propaganda, right? Propaganda is where you're trying to persuade someone, but censorship is just shutting something down. So
Mhm.
that's kind of more of a Saturnian function, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I can use Hitler in an example.
No, I mean, I'm not sorry. I
Why
didn't.
that's not a good one.
I know. I
You're throwing me for a loop here. Uh, um, I know YouTube doesn't want you to say his name, but I mean that's kind of the silliness of the algorithm. If you're talking history, then you got to talk about the guy. And speaking
yeah.
of propaganda, I mean that's all I'm talking about. I mean he was very adept at well he raised the bar for political propaganda in terms of its power and amplification. So that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, exactly. Pixie says Mercury-Pluto reminds me of cult leaders, manipulative information. So that's where I'm getting with that. All right.
Paranoid thinking from Pixie, um, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so after the new moon
After the
in
new moon, yes. The next thing we have coming up here in terms of big aspects is Mercury square Jupiter on Saturday the 10th, the day after the new moon. You can see the new moon is just sort of wearing up here. This is always an important square, really, because these are two planets that rule two of the axes in the zodiac, the Mercury Pisces axis and the Gemini Sagittarius axis. So when you do get a square between these two planets, depending on what houses you have those signs in, it should be, at the best of times, any of the zodiacal axes are sort of um, harmonious. That the two rulers are, if you want a good Sun Saturn relationship, you want a good Moon Saturn relationship to have Leo and Aquarius or Cancer and Capricorn sort of work out for you. If you catch my drift.
right,
So depending on what houses you have, say, Pisces and Virgo, there can be the angular, the square rather, relationship between Mercury and Jupiter can present in some instances an aggravation, within the bounds of whatever houses those signs fall in. So yeah, it's conceivable if you're Virgo rising and you're married and the Pisces is your seventh house, the Mercury Jupiter square can, if there's other things considered, if there's discord in the marriage, then that can sort of aggravate that kind of thing or represent an aggravation in terms of the activities represented by that axis. Make sense?
yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, I tend not to see it too negatively, even though it is a square.
Hmm.
But I think certainly one negative connotation that a Mercury Jupiter square could have is maybe embellishments, right? If Mercury is logic, rationality, language, communication, then being in a square with Jupiter is maybe going to potentially distort that and cause people to, or would be coincident with people perhaps promising things which are too rosy, making projections or calculations that are too forgiving, or using too wide of a margin of error, and so that tendency to kind of say more or promise more than you can really deliver is a potential issue with Mercury Jupiter square. I would probably say the same thing about the Sun square Jupiter. That famously George W. Bush, who had the Sun, rather who had his Sun square Jupiter, was the guy to say mission accomplished, right? When the mission was not accomplished. I also think of Donald Trump, who has a very wide Mercury Jupiter square across Cancer and Libra. And he's obviously someone who has a very tortured relationship with the truth. The Mercury-Neptune square is actually tighter than the Mercury-Jupiter square. So his
Right.
Mercury is in the 12th, square Jupiter and Neptune. So what is your healthcare plan, Mr. Trump? Oh, it's a big, beautiful plan. It's big, no detail. So
Right.
but so it can kind of speak to wheeling, dealing, and being able to negotiate and promise more than you can deliver. I think that's maybe one of the pitfalls of this time.
Yeah, I think it's also with Mercury, in the 10th position to Jupiter's first position, with Mercury sending the square to Jupiter. There's an undermining influence here. Jupiter is what is established, what is believed, what is accepted, and then Mercury is always about questioning, challenging, undermining. And so with Mercury sending the square to Jupiter, you see that in Trump, his whole. Look at what he's done to the Republican Party. You could think of like Jupiter being the Republican Party and Mercury being, what the MAGA movement has done to it, sort of undermining this longstanding institution. So there's that element to his personality that he's the great underminer of
So in
of
a
the day.
way, Mercury in Aquarius square Jupiter and Taurus could be like, say a new IT person comes in to show some nuns, how to do their email, and they're used to only using snail mail, so there's a kind of
I don't know where.
pushback,
Okay,
against in Mercury's innovations, basically, versus
sure.
that which is maybe established or tried and true.
Yeah, some kind of undermining of some longstanding belief or institution or authority or things like that. Okay, moving right along. What do we have next here?
I don't know. I think my IT
Here
nuns are a better example than Hitler, but sorry, I'm just gonna keep hitting you with that. Anyway,
Look,
I
everyone likes nuns more than they like Hitler. That's besides the
okay.
point. All right, here we are. This is Mars conjunct Pluto at 0 Aquarius. This is on February the 14th. Again, Chris and Austin we're having a good laugh at the fact that this is not the most romantic looking Valentine's Day, and I have
Right.
to concur. Uh, I don't know, some things you just can't say with flowers. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try and do Valentine's night early this year. Get those flowers a day early or what have you. What do you think about now? Obviously, this isn't too long. This is only 9 days after the Mercury-Pluto conjunction. So, like I said, I
Right.
think there's some kind of sequence happening here.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, Mars. I know, like, this is like one of the most like feared sort of combinations. And it's tricky because you do legitimately find people who maybe have committed terrible acts, who have done really bad things, like under Mars Pluto conjunctions. You also find examples of like extreme heroism. So you can find like mass shooters and
Mm,
stuff with Mars Pluto conjunctions. You can also find like Medal of Honor recipients, with Mars Pluto conjunctions. People who've given their lives for others. Extreme bravery, right? Or extreme villainy. Um, Given the Aquarian nature of this conjunction, I would think that this could make sense for a kind of airborne type of disaster, right? We know that when Mars was conjunct Pluto in Lake Capricorn, shortly after the Ukraine war began, or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, um, they set fire to nuclear reactors.
mm,
Um, you
right.
know, that's doesn't seem like a very auspicious thing. Then, knowing that we're kind of coming back. In fact, at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that was the last time Venus and Mars were together with Pluto
Yes,
in Lake
exactly.
Capricorn going into Aquarius. So
Mhm.
this is kind of an odd return back to some of the dynamics from those times. So I would assume that this could potentially involve that storyline, given that that was so integral to the previous kind of analog of this
Mhm.
alignment. Um, so yeah, I would say a potential for extraordinary or extreme sort of disasters involving things that are in the air, or that potentially involve things like nuclear technology, or perhaps since it might be announced by Mercury, maybe this is like some sort of cybercrime from the dark web. There's like dark GPT, right, which is like a which is like the dark web's sort of cybercrimes AI that developed to be as like evil and insidious as possible. So I think that uh, I see that kind of conjunction, and that's kind of where my mind
Mhm.
starts going. But I might be misleading myself, I guess.
Yeah, I'd be curious to look at what sort of Mars-Pluto conjunctions we had the last time um, Pluto was in Aquarius. Let's see here. Mars conjunct Pluto, and
I
then
love how the comments have just blown up with comments about nuns. um,
okay, all
uh,
right,
wow. Mars Pluto reminds me of snipers, Pixie says. B Haven says passion and power conjoined seems pretty scary. I mean, yeah, I mean, Mars isn't always very nice. So when it's conjoined with Pluto, that can definitely um, turn the heat up.
right,
Um,
okay. Well, there's not too much Mars and Pluto. There's just a Thomas Paine completing Rights of Man and um,
yeah,
and
unfortunately, we
some.
just don't have a lot of data necessarily
Yeah, I
from
just wanted to
the
see
last
what would
time.
come. Yeah, I just wanted to see what would come up. Not that much so far. Okay. After Mars Pluto, what do we have next?
Venus, I believe.
Yep. So this is just a few days later on the 17th. Yeah, Venus Pluto is tends to be triangulation. It tends to be like someone walks into three's a crowd. You've got some kind of pair or union happening, and then a third element is introduced into it. Um, what are your thoughts on this?
Uh, AI girlfriends,
Right.
virtual virtual dating. You know, I think of the fact that very recently, I guess uh, some person out there made some kind of deep fake AI like uh, pornographic images of Taylor Swift, and she sort of indicated that she was going to try to pursue this sort of legally. And now there's been chatter that Congress might actually try to um, craft some laws which sort of specialize to this type of crime
Right.
of this sort of invasion of privacy. So knowing that like Venus and Mars and Pluto are going to be all conjoined together in this sign of Aquarius makes me wonder if like deep fake porn and AI porn would kind of come in the crosshairs, and there would be this this sort of publicized discussion of these kind of charged
Right.
topics that relate to human sexuality and violations of people's rights. Um,
Sure, but you know who won't be protected from this is historical figures. So like I can understand like Taylor Swift having legal recourse to protect herself from this kind of invasion, but like Marie Antoinette or Marilyn Monroe, oh,
or Hitler,
Queen Elizabeth, yeah, yeah, or
uh,
nuns, uh,
yeah, nuns.
Hitler and
Um,
Hitler and nun porn.
oh my god, don't say it exists. I
But
mean,
it's
this is
gonna like this is but these are the kinds of things that could come out of this. Like, okay, it's like things in
public
the
domain AI porn.
because
Yeah, like
I get it. Taylor Swift should be protected from this. But Virginia Woolf, will she be protected? Will the so yeah, it raises some really interesting questions, and depending on how the laws shape up, and people who either break the law or find some means to sort of do what they want to do uh, um, around the parameters of the law. Uh,
Well,
should be interesting.
yeah, I think that's well, yeah, and I imagine it wouldn't just be this. I mean, there's also been this possibility of people making like other illegal kinds of pornography, but so it's not real, but it's like, but it looks very, very real, right? So it's
Right.
should that be
Yeah.
allowed, or should that be allowed so that these people have like that outlet? Psychologists seem to be kind of divided on whether like that's if that helps protect society or if that is worse for like encouraging someone to kind of focus or dwell on like an unhealthy like or damaging socially damaging type of obsession. um
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah, exactly. I think, I don't even, I can't claim to know what, like, I haven't formed an opinion on any of this. And I
mm,
imagine a lot of us haven't, like, it's
right,
gonna,
well, we
it's
haven't
only,
had to really think about this before.
yeah, we haven't had to think about it. And we don't really know, where people are going to go with this. And I think a lot of it will just wind up being, um, responsive, like reactive to whatever surfaces. So yeah, for now it's Taylor Swift, and that's kind of a no brainer. That people who are living, breathing people with rights to their own privacy and image and all that they're protected. But the public domain exists, and there's a minefield out there. Mona Lisa, like anything's possible.
Right.
Um, B Havens is saying, I did a bunch of battle dates for World War One and Two, but did not do it for Revolutionary War and French Revolutionary. It might be worth it to look at any Pluto Mars conjunction days. Yeah, I have a lot of battles from the Revolutionary War and the French Revolutionary War, and nothing, no Mars Pluto came up for any of those battles. Otherwise, I would have had them. Okay. Let's see. I'm just reading some comments here. Pixie says Mars Pluto reminds me of snipers. Yeah, I get that. And Metaphysical Pisces, every time Russia and Ukraine were involved in a battle was under Mars Neptune aspect. I don't know about that. They've been battling every day, especially Pluto, the design Mars conjunction the war finishes. Okay, well, I don't know. That doesn't track I've been looking at, but who knows?
um I kind of see um do you remember back in 2007 there was that um shooting at Virginia Tech
Yeah.
University? There's this college shooting. So the perpetrator of that shooting, he was born on January 18th, 1984. And that was the day of a Mars-Pluto conjunction in Scorpio, co-present with Saturn. And that
Shall I put
kind of
that up?
stuck with me. Yeah, if you would like.
Where was he born?
January 18th, 1984. His name is Seung Hui Cho. I don't
Okay.
know exactly that's the correct pronunciation, but this was the Virginia Tech shooter, and he
Right.
had that kind of Mars Saturn, Mars Pluto conjunction in Scorpio that lets you know this is someone who right might be.
Yep.
Well, I mean, obviously we don't even have a birth time for this, obviously. So it's not really fair to say, but we do know in whatever way Mars is acting this chart, it would have the potential to, act in an extreme way, and obviously to do something like that is horrendous. And I have a couple of other examples of it. I don't have them right on hand, but I know like there was a Medal of Honor recipient who basically sacrificed himself to save a bunch of other soldiers, and he I remember looking him up. He had like a Mars Pluto conjunction in Cancer.
Okay. Well, I could just look at general nativities and Mars Pluto conjunctions. see who comes up here.
Oh,
James Holmes, wasn't he the shooter at
James Holmes. Yeah, he was also he was the shooter of at the movie theater. He was
that?
also born with Mars conjunct Pluto and Scorpio.
Right. There he is. Here, I'll give him his angles. Yeah, so there he is down at the IC, the Mars-Pluto. And who else do we have? Emily Dickinson, Charles Baudelaire. I could see them being together in an AI porn.
Oh my god! Oh no! Oh no!
Paul McCartney. That's right. He's got that. And Ringo Starr. The two living Beatles both have Mars-Pluto conjunctions. That's right. Oh man. Okay. Well, I mean, they have been, they have been bringing back the dead. They've been using AI to resurrect, John and George, right? In a recent video. The last release of a Beatles song. So I wonder what's coming there. Who else is living that has the Mars-Pluto conjunction that we can talk about? Kevin Spacey. He was recently acquitted of all these legal charges against him. Some people think it's conspiratorial. Some people think he was, justifiably cleared. I don't really claim to know the details. Jimmy Fallon, I mean, he's on TV still for whatever TV matters. He's got a Mars-Pluto conjunction. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think okay. So some politicians like Ro Khanna, but I think James Holmes is maybe the really interesting takeaway here. Another shooter. All right.
Yeah, there's also been some Sun-Mars shooters as well, like people with some conjunct Mars. So it's not always Mars-Pluto. There was another one that I was trying to look for. Well, I should have a database.
I'm still working. I'm still, I'm growing it every day, but you never have enough.
Yeah, so I would think that, those Mars-Pluto dates would, they do hold that kind of potential for, needing to summon courage, as well as, well, I guess for everyone, I would hope that it's just about summoning courage in whatever way you need to in your life.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know this kind of other extreme potential exists.
Okay. So on to the next conjunction. Let's see here. Oh, the next aspect is the full moon. So let's have a look at that. There we are. So on February 24th, the last week of February is arguably the sort of the most active, because we're heading into this really interesting triple cazimi of Mercury, Sun, Saturn that we'll touch on in a minute. But it's preceded by this full moon. So any thoughts about this?
Yeah. So interestingly, so I looked up some past iterations of this when there would have been a full moon in Virgo opposite the Sun, Mercury, and Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so there was an event like this at the beginning of a papal conclave to select a new pope. So this was on March 5th, 1730.
Okay.
It was the day after a full moon in Virgo. And this particular
March 15th,
election,
March 15th, 1730.
March 5th, 1730.
Sorry. Okay, so
So
that's kind of close.
yeah, so it's a Mercury retrograde as well. Now, this so on March 5th, that was the beginning of this papal conclave, and interestingly, um this particular papal conclave was considered to be the longest and the most corrupt of the 18th century. Um so I guess this particular election was seen to be extremely fractious and um sort of hastily arranged and all these sorts of I don't know much of the
Interesting.
history of it, but I think what is interesting about it is we know that Mercury has to do with elections, with the count, with the record, right? Because it's the
Mm,
geometer, it's the counter.
sure.
Um, and so we also know that when it's conjunct the sun, that Mercury can sometimes struggle because it's like invisible or overshadowed by the sun. It's like trying to um, use an abacus, looking right at the sun. You
Sure.
can't see exactly what the numbers are. And Mercury in this particular case was also retrograde, so we know Mercury is acting sort of again irregularly, and it's also in the sign of Pisces, which is not uh, typically considered to be a wonderful sign for Mercury to perform its
It's very
essential
yeah.
function in.
It's a very creative Mercury. It's not a
Yeah,
sort of,
I mean,
yeah.
it
Uh,
can have good yeah, it can have good qualities. But but in terms of I feel like Mercury in Pisces is like a student trying to get their homework done in the middle of a rave, in the middle of like a bacchanalian Mardi Gras party,
Right.
trying to get any studying done is going to be hard because there's like so much fun and chaos going on around you, and how can you not get swept up in that moment? Well, Mercury is trying to do yeah, that's the way I always think of it. It's not that Mercury is dumb or Mercury is bad. It's that Mercury has a function, which is to like study and make sense of things and you know
Sure.
be heard. And
Yeah.
you can't do that in a loud, rave.
Yeah. No,
uh,
that makes perfect sense. Well, I wasn't good. I've got the conjunction lined up. It's sort of out of sequence here.
mhm,
Um, there's, but we'll just jump to it since we're talking about it. Um, so yeah, this is okay. This is Mercury square Jupiter on the 27th. Then on, uh, but I must have the Mercury conjunction in there, don't I? Or does it come after? Okay, I'm
happens
out of
on the same day, on
happens on
February
the same day. So
28th.
there's yeah. There we are. So there's the Mercury conjunction. This is the Sun conjunction. Um, Yeah, it's the problem with solar fire. It won't sequence things on the same date, like, chronologically according to time, which is another sort of
Mhm,
silly thing it
right.
does. Um, so that's why it's just it hasn't given to me in sequence. But yeah, we get this triple Cazimi on February 28th. Where's the whole Republican Party thing going to be at by February 28th? I mean, that this is a month away, and usually these things are sort of drawn out and these, really sort of a lot of drama and
Well,
but this is just so cut and dried,
the
right?
very end of the very end of the primary season occurs in early June. And so, as you know, that's always going to be either during a blue three when the sun is conjoining Venus in Gemini in this era,
Hmm.
or a red three where Venus is going retrograde in Gemini, roughly. Um, so, uh, and because that is when the primary season finishes, that's typically when you get, the presumptive nominee, or close to that time. That's when it sort of becomes clear who is sort of in position. But we also know that Mercury has this connection to elections, and will have doubts about the accuracy, basically, of the
Right.
tabulations from this time. There'll be in the similar way that there was to the very similar alignment back in 1730, a corrupt and flawed sort of election, compromised election that starts on that date. So it is an interesting parallel. But the main way that I see that full moon is just that it's sort of lighting up the opposition, which will become exact by itself just a few days later. I will say though that it kind of reminds me of the Burning Man moon, the one that resulted in the
Mm,
Burning Man festivities being washed out, because that was I
right,
believe that was a new moon conjunct Saturn. So this is like a full moon opposite Saturn
right, right. Good
in Pisces.
observation.
So I would wonder about the possibility of disastrous, like watery events, or maybe just like really bad storms that maybe
Mhm.
affect a particular place. I'm not sure where, maybe where the moon is visible or something. Um,
Okay.
so, but I would have some other things to say about the Sun Mercury Saturn conjunction just by itself, aside from the full moon. Is that where you were going next?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
What
sure.
do you have?
Well, so we know that another um thing that happened the last time that we had a similar kind of arrangement to this was back in February of, what was it, 1966.
Oh, yes.
So
65. You're February
oh, pardon
1965.
me, pardon me. um
Yeah,
yeah,
this is a preview for next week's episode.
right.
The murder of Malcolm X in February of 1965. Yeah, I see where you're going with this. It's not like a triple Kazemi like we're having this time around, but we do have Mercury, Sun, and Saturn all together in Pisces.
So the reason why this is relevant is obviously, like, there's a lot going on in Virgo as well.
Hmm.
Right? So we shouldn't see this like in isolation. I'm not saying this is the only reason why we'd be looking at the assassination of Malcolm X, but I think it's relevant because it just so happens that at the beginning of February, there's actually going to be this new series being released about Malcolm X. So I think it's really interesting that, as the same planetary configuration that was present at his passing, at his death, his murder, um, is that sort of coming back into formation, we'll be getting this kind of cultural message, basically this refocus of those times through this show called Genius MLK/X. Um,
Right, right.
and
Um,
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, I watched on Netflix, a program about, Malcolm X's assassination and, who was culpable, sort of looking for the actual shooters. They were involved in the Nation of Islam, and but sort of like cleverly disguised as kind of scapegoats, if you will. But yeah, it's an ongoing question, and it's an ongoing wound. The fact that this was an in-house deal, essentially. Well, or at least I mean, Malcolm had been a member of the Nation of Islam.
Right.
So yeah, there's a whole kind of controversy in terms of like just despite his visibility and his stature and his reputation, Malcolm X wasn't killed by say a white policeman or someone you would expect, or a a CIA sting or something of that nature, but it was done in full public view and by people that he had once been associated with.
Right. I think it's also relevant then that there are some of the reprisals that happened against mosques in the
Mm.
days after he was assassinated,
Right, right.
is also kind of evocative here, not just of like, well, I mean, it's not just Saturn in Pisces, which would be then bringing, great scrutiny upon Piscean, like, belief systems and religions, but also with that opposition from Mars retrograde and Uranus and Pluto. We just know this is really, just way more kind of intense than we might otherwise
Yeah, good point.
think if it was just by itself. And really, when I think of Mercury, Mercury is like the messenger, is the speaker. And when Mercury is put into Pisces, a sign which even constellationally they say is mute, and that it's obscured by the sun, and that it's going towards Saturn, a planet of limitation and restriction, I feel like it was really the great silencing, of a great thinker and a great speaker. And um, that is really, the that was the great loss, of this. It was, I mean, I don't need to, I'm not even probably the best person to, to talk about the legacy of Malcolm X, but I think that uh, it's interesting that at in that same time frame, so like on February 21st, Malcolm X was assassinated, and we had this great speaker silenced. On that same day, the U.S. announced that the satellite Vanguard one of the first satellites put up, was no longer communicating data. So we had another
Oh,
instance on the same day of
interesting.
losing communication. Then the very next day, the Soviet Union launched a capsule, Cosmos 57, and because of errors with communication in launching it, they caused it to self-destruct. So
Wow.
again, they like lost communication. That was between, because I guess the issue was there were like two ground control centers, and they were supposed to do something in sequence, but they ended up doing it at the same time, and so it ended up sort of crossing wires. What crossed wires basically resulted in, again, the silencing of communication. Um, and then, as you are also aware, on February 24th, that was when LBJ ordered Operation Rolling Thunder, which I don't think is just related to the Sun-Mercury-Saturn thing. I think that probably is more of an ongoing Mars retrograde story of that time,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
escalation of the Vietnam War. Um, but I just think that when I take those things together, there were a few other things I found from the mid 60s period. There was like new restrictions being put on advertisements in that time, which I thought was another very interesting
Oh,
Mercury Saturn.
interesting. What kind of
Um,
restrictions?
I wish I could remember. This is just something
Okay.
I kind of hastily looked up, but I think it's interesting because it reinforces the kind of thematic idea of Mercury Saturn, which is like Saturn somehow controlling or regulating or limiting speech so that it falls within certain sort of guidelines. And so I think in our current context, I would wonder if there would be maybe it's like some new rollout on, say, social media, say Twitter, the site formerly known as Twitter, on how much you can tweet, say, in a given day, or there
Right.
may be kind of limitations put around your ability to speak. Maybe this will be data restrictions on email accounts or something like that. It will be some kind of limitation on how you can express yourself online
Yeah.
or
I
what advertisers are doing.
Yeah, you might be onto something there.
The
New things.
silencing.
Yeah, we're talking about censorship, but there's also, besides censorship, there's something that people like Elon Musk confuse for censorship, which is just at the will of advertisers.
Mhm.
Uh, um, it's not, it's not the government that says you can't talk about Hitler on YouTube. It's the YouTube algorithm rhythm, which is dictated by advertisers who themselves are conducting studies of their market. And it's actually incredibly democratic, like frustratingly democratic, really. In the sense that uh, like people who usually champion the free hand of the market fail to recognize when the free hand of the market sort of goes against their own worldview. It's occurring to me, Elon Musk has Mars at 20 Aquarius. We were talking about that new moon that's coming
That's
up.
right. Oh,
Yeah.
so he is probably going to be some bull crap, development. We're rolling out this new thing to improve your experience, which does neither of those things. Um,
Right.
it'll so especially given that it's like a double Cazimi, right? It's two planets that are going to be hit by this at the
Hmm.
same time, and they're really combining all of their significations together at the same time. That's what makes me think it would be more. Oh, look, you can even see that Sun-Mercury-Saturn thing will be opposite his moon.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
would almost,
Yeah,
you know,
this looks like, yeah, I think shall we call, in fact, let's put up a buy
calling it.
reel here. Calling
Yeah,
it Elon being stupid with Twitter when we get to the Kazemi.
yeah.
Um, let's.
um,
I think we've just all made. Yeah, there we are. So this is the day of the conjunction. You can see that the triple Kazemi opposite his natal moon by a degree, and of course, just a few days earlier, there would have been the new moon. The new moon on his yeah.
If you want to make this even funnier, the first tweet ever sent from this business from Twitter was on March 21st, 2006, which was when Mercury was retrograde in Pisces conjunct Uranus
I think I
between
do have the
11 to
first
13.
I think I do have the first tweet.
So that Sun-Mercury-Saturn conjunction is basically very close to where Mercury was. In fact, that's kind of one of the things.
There we are. There's that first tweet. Okay. So yeah, I see what you're getting at here.
Yeah. In fact, I've sort of, if you throw that tweet chart back up, I've sort of been thinking as Saturn moves closer to the degree of Mercury in the Twitter chart, I feel like that will be like the great silencing of
Right.
this platform. It will be when
Yeah.
that really goes down. And note that Mercury's conjunct Uranus, right? So it's about the sort of unbound speech, which is then going to be kind of closed off as Saturn.
You're
passes
so
over.
right. I think we're really hitting something here. See, this is why we do the live stream. Sometimes, we only do so much preparation, but it's just sort of what emerges over the course of the conversation. But you're absolutely right. Look at that. Look at that. I think you're right. I mean, everyone's been saying Twitter's days are numbered, right? And
Right.
it's falling apart. And I mean, I'm using it every day. It's still working for me, but I know what people. But the inside the little astrology ecosystem on Twitter, it's still reasonably healthy. But I get how, like, outside the, I really only use it for astrology now.
I get 100% more like spammy, scammy things now on Twitter. I don't know if you've had similar experience.
I don't get as much of that. I mostly just get astrology stuff. Or at least maybe I just have a natural filter for not noticing all the other garbage.
Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to go, that's because of what you're searching, Patrick.
Yeah, right. But no, I think your point is taken. Like as Saturn gets closer to this point, like, either this triple Cazimi heralds the end of Twitter, or it comes not too long afterwards. But this looks like it's it's
I mean, it will also square Mars and then the moon. Also worth noting that Mars in Gemini, that's where Mars was retrograde when Elon first took it over.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Very good point. Oh boy.
Yeah. So
oh boy. Yeah. I think you're dead on, my friend. I think you're dead on.
Yeah. We'll see. But
you heard it here, probably not even, but
right. I mean, I think everyone's kind of been on an extended like Twitter death watch. And it's gone so long now that I think we we're kind of operating in limbo right now. So suspended animation, like going along with this for as long as it's still there, but eventually enough stupid things will happen that will really just close it for good.
Right. I mean, on some level, we're aware that we're still waiting for it to come by surprise, because we the pot waiting for it to boil so long that when it finally does boil, it's like, oh, it was inevitable after all. Yeah, well done, my friend. I think that you're absolutely right. I think Twitter looks like it's long for
right, not long for this world for sure. So after the Sun-Mercury-Saturn conjunction, that's it. Right, for February.
But I think I accidentally skipped the Venus-Mars conjunction.
Oh,
did
yeah.
We not talk about
we should
that?
probably. Well, we kind of talked about it, the whole thing, but I would think you would want to address like the 32-year thing and
right. So back in 1992, 32 years earlier, there would have been a Venus-Mars conjunction in Aquarius. Were you not looking at something in February of 1992?
Oh yes, yeah, that's right. All right, yeah. So I did forget about this. So 32 years before this Venus-Mars conjunction was what was the exact date of it? February 20th, 1992.
I have
Yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, February 20th, 1992.
I have the marriage of Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love 4 days later. I don't have the chart that you're talking about, but this is 4 days
Okay.
after you're talking about when the conjunction happened.
That's very appropriate though. For that couple especially.
Right.
Um so yeah, on February 20th, 1992, this is when Ross Perot entered the 1992 presidential election race. And I thought that was interesting because, this pretty late in the game to be entering the presidential race. Uh, some of the other contests would have already happened. And
Right.
Ross Perot, I mean, I wasn't, I was still, I was just a kid at this point without any awareness of this, but I was surprised to learn that, Ross Perot, despite announcing late and running as an independent, I mean, he had enough support to actually appear on the debate stage alongside H.W. Bush and Clinton.
Mhm.
Um, so in terms of like third party candidates, he's sort of had more success, say, than maybe a comparable sort of figure like Bloomberg or something in the 2020 race. um Bloomberg, as you might remember, got eaten alive by Elizabeth Warren on stage and during one of the primary debates, in wonderful Mercury-Mars fashion. She's another Mercury-Mars conjunction native.
Oh, yes,
um
yes, of course.
so but yeah, so Ross Perot announced that he was going to run. And I think what's interesting about this from the perspective of Venus and Mars is that and you've talked about this a lot, Nick, that the American electoral system, because it's based on these periods of like 4 years and 8 years for
Mhm.
presidential terms, well, it ends up having a very clear relation to the planet Venus, which has these very regular intervals of 4 and 8 years. So we can almost see Venus, especially in the context of the American political system, as representing like order, the order of elections, the order of the terms, and of the presidency generally. And so when Venus is conjunct Mars, we kind of get these transgressions or breaks in the order of how things are kind of supposed to go. And that's why you get kind of sometimes violent events involving politics at Venus Mars conjunctions. Did you want to take us through a couple of those?
Oh,
Well, while you can think about which ones you might want to look at, and I'll continue talking about this.
Yeah, yeah, please
So the
do.
way it applies in this case is, you know, he was kind of a surprise, right? He came in late in the game. Like, this is not sort of what's supposed to happen in a sense. He, kind of comes in as this dark horse independent candidate, and while he doesn't make it, he makes a big enough impression that Clinton's only able to win by a plurality, not even by a majority. So it looks like we have some Perot voters in the chat. Uh,
What?
B. Havens is telling us Perot entered the race because he wanted to screw Bush over. He had contractors in Iraq when Bush got into the first war, and Bush didn't get them out. Perot had to hire mercs to save his people. Yeah, interesting. All right, yeah. So there's a lot of history here that I'm not aware of, but I think it is interesting that that happened because 32 years later, we're going to have Venus and Mars being conjunct in the same part of the zodiac relative to the Sun in Pisces. So I would wonder then if there would be another potential in the political context of there being a similar kind of break in decorum or um, unusual alliance that occurs at that Venus Mars conjunction, that there's some kind of order or pattern or sort of decorum in a sense, which is being maybe transgressed or broken or crossed over at the time of the Venus Mars conjunction. So I'm not saying maybe this could be like another third party, independent candidate. Maybe it'd be exactly the same as it was before, or it could be something more unusual or maybe somewhat anticipated, like maybe RFK Jr. Manages to sort of have a stronger than expected showing, and suddenly is seen as more of a being more of an important figure to take into account. So there's some things to consider, but I think you have a few things you wanted to mention, Nick.
Oh, well, the one thing I was going to bring up here, I'm not sure what else you're referring to. Did I tell you something else I was going to bring up? Or
Well, in terms of like what Venus-Mars conjunctions and how they can represent breaks in the order of the, especially in politics. Like, for example, JFK was assassinated at a
oh, during
Venus-Mars
Venus-Mars
conjunction.
conjunction, and right, and Bobby Kennedy as well.
RFK Jr., who's RFK Sr., right, who's the father of the guy
Yeah,
who's
yeah,
running, was assassinated at a Sun Venus Mars conjunction, that same blue 3
right. Here,
conjunct Mars. Yeah,
I'll
I
pull up.
thought you were gonna.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
I can pull this up here. Venus-Mars conjunctions. Everyone can see how I use the database, which is becoming more and more available on my websites that I do here. These are all the deaths I have on Venus-Mars conjunctions. And so, yes, amongst these, I should use a wider orb. Let's go with say an 8-degree orb. There we are. So yeah, amongst these, there should be. Why is Bobby Kennedy not showing up here? Okay,
It
that's
might
not
be still too wide. It was basically at a Sun Venus Mars conjunction in
yeah. Here we are.
1965.
8.
Oh, 8. What am I talking about?
Dude, I was in
I
my
know.
medical. Oh, this is this is what the triple conjunction would happen a little bit later in early Cancer, but yeah, it's still pretty close. It's 9 degrees. But yeah, that's the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. John F. Kennedy indeed is. Of all the things not to have in the death file, I'll have to put that in right away, especially because I'm selling that death file on my website. But I'll throw John F. Kennedy's assassination in there. I know I have the chart. There we are. Okay. That's why it's a chart for his shooting and not his death. And so it didn't make it into the death file, but I'll put that in there. So this is the shooting of John F. Kennedy with Venus and Mars. Basically, if you look at it in a bi-wheel with his brother's murder 5 years later, 4.5 years later, yeah, there's an opposition here between the two.
Now, obviously, I'm only mentioning this as like the most extreme version of like an interruption of the established order, but it's important to consider that Bobby Kennedy himself was similar to Perot in that he also kind of entered late, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Challenge LBJ, and that only happened because LBJ said he wasn't gonna.
No, Bobby was already in the race by the time LBJ said he wouldn't. No, but not long before, like maybe 2 weeks before. It's Bobby joining the race is part of what compels LBJ to say he won't run again. I mean, the main reason is the Tet offensive and at the end of January, the New Year offensive, and the sort of the media backlash that it created. It's when Walter Cronkite sort of declares that the war seems unwinnable. But then Bobby enters the race, and LBJ and Bobby Kennedy hated each other. And so the last thing, I mean, LBJ had a huge ego and had fought his entire life to someday be president. I mean, just sort of ruthlessly.
Right.
But there was no way. It's kind of like Trump, except like LBJ had the intelligence to do what Trump wouldn't, which is like to have such a big ego that he would rather take himself out of the race rather than lose to his mortal enemy. That's basically the quick end of the story.
Yeah.
And then Bobby gets shot and LBJ's like, oh, damn. No, but I think
and this is really interesting, right? Because I kind of, in my head canon is that the blue 3 or red 3 Venus retrogrades are like and really I see those almost as like the nomination, cycle, because it's when it coincides with when the basic candidates, are in place. So when that's sort of official. So I think it's really notable then that, like, since this one happened with Mars, that that process took place with a extreme break in decorum. That
Yeah,
it was like the person who might have very well won, could have prevented the
probably
Nixon
would have. Yeah,
years, from
yeah,
even happening. Was taken out of the race and out of
yeah.
the earth. So
Well, jumping back to the modern, this is the bi-wheel I wanted to show you, is just to point out that Prince Andrew of England is turning 64 years old on the 22nd of February, or on the 19th of February. And he's got the natal Venus-Mars conjunction. And so that recurrence in his solar return comes up. And he, of course, is one of the people who's, been, whose reputation has been ruined by his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein.
I would say he ruined it himself when he,
Well, yes. Yeah.
I
Okay.
know what you
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. Don't pretend I was saying something other than that. I mean,
Sorry, Nick. I'm
clarifying. Thank you for clarifying, but please don't suggest that I was
no. I'm kidding.
the gallant Prince Andrew wrongly besmirched.
But he doesn't sweat, Nick.
Oh man,
did you see that interview? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god, that was the most horrible thing. But
yeah,
but very gratifying to see him squirm. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
I prefer he face the consequences, but
yeah,
it's yeah, and this is something that I've talked about before, and I know it hasn't always been popular, but this sort of came up as we were discussing the Venus-Mars-Pluto conjunction in general, and like what that could mean as far as discussing the sort of violations of rights, because Venus, since it can represent desire and romantic love, then like Mars can like either heat that up in like a cool way or like tarnish it instead of a bad way. We've seen there's a lot of examples of people who've gotten in trouble for their sexual peccadillos, with Venus Mars, co-presence or Venus Mars alignments. And so it's just something I'm kind of aware of. So I see that in his chart, and then hearing the kind of allegations against him, he falls in a line of people who've had some of the similar experiences with Venus conjunct Mars natally.
Right. And as we mentioned on our episode about who's getting Plutoed 2 weeks ago, Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, that's true.
Transit to even though Epstein is dead, he's still doing a transit. Pluto bring the dead back to life, so to speak. And I have this hunch that we're almost going to be hearing from Epstein himself in some fashion in the coming month, and that some of the revelations regarding the ongoing who done it in his
I would
story.
assume that he bought insurance for himself, in a sense. That there would, in the event he ever, got killed, if he died, then, he would still, have a way of kind of holding power over the people he implicated. So, all right. So I'm looking at the comments here.
Here, I'm just putting up Epstein's chart here so people can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, Pluto transiting over his sun.
Look where his Venus and Mars are.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, look at where his Venus and Mars are. Yeah, so he and Prince Andrew have the Venus-Mars conjunctions. We are definitely hearing more about this in the coming month. Definitely. All right. What are people saying in the comments?
A lot. There's a lot. Jane says there are rumors of videos of the whole Epstein debacle featuring Prince Andrew will surface soon.
Yeah.
Back on the political discussion, Behaven said, I feel we're at a moment in history where we need a Truman or Eisenhower, and instead we have a bunch of clowns armed with nukes. Truman did use nukes, though.
Sure, but he also
I think I understand what you mean by that, but like
he
he's like the one guy who did do it.
true, but MacArthur wanted to drop nukes on China during the Korean War, and Truman was like, "No effing way," and fired him. So, you know,
Yeah.
he's someone who learned from his mistake. I mean, yeah, it's true. He is the only person who's ever done it. So there's that. Frankenstein, Epstein, Grody to the
Yeah.
max. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I gotta say, there's a lot of really sort of. I mean, these things shouldn't. Well, I wouldn't have a reason to suspect that they would necessarily be that there would be assassinations in this time, but it's weird how many of the events that these um configurations point back to are assassinations, like Malcolm X with
Yeah,
Sun-Mercury-Saturn in Pisces,
the
um,
Kennedys.
the Kennedys. Yeah, it's sort of there's a few throwbacks that are kind of happening to some of those really hard periods. I know for well, really like the mid '60s were kind of just. I mean, that's really two of the three that I can think of like the really
Well, there's
big assassinations
well
that
three of
shaped
the
the
four,
60s.
three of the four, I would say.
The four, what
Well,
fourth
because
would
also
be?
Martin Luther King.
Yeah, that's the third one I was thinking of. What's the
No,
fourth
but
one?
Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Four.
Yeah, right. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I don't
Yeah.
know, I can't count is what happened. Um,
But I would
yeah,
actually,
those
I
are the
mean,
four I was thinking.
it's actually broader than that because it's also during the 60s that you start to see, right in the mid 60s, that you get a lot of these coups, military coups in Africa, and there's a lot of if you go to Africa throughout the 60s, there's a whole series of political assassinations from Lumumba in 1961. The Hammarskjöld, the Secretary General of the United Nations, assassinated in Africa. Well, it was a plane crash, but it was a CIA operation, and a whole bunch of Olympias of Togo and yeah, just a lot of these, it's something that's become kind of an ongoing trend, but it really erupts in the sort of post-colonial world of Africa. A lot of assassinations there. So when you look at it in that regard, like outside of the United States, it really is a whole new age with regard to political assassination.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
um, yeah.
Happy
So
days. Happy
right.
days
So
are here again. No, no, no. Okay.
yeah. So those are some of the things we're thinking about for February.
Because we're such cheerful optimists.
Does anyone have any other questions about February or?
Jimi Hendrix died in 1970, not the
Oh, we're
60s.
responding to a comment about Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
B. Hammond says, I said Truman and Eisenhower because they were both thoughtful persons, unlike the knee-jerk buffoonery we have lately. I mean, I can't deny there's knee-jerk
Eisenhower.
buffoonery.
Yeah, I think Eisenhower was kind of a knee-jerk buffoon as well. Well, he had. I mean, it's not so much him. He was just so hands off. But I mean, he had the Dulles brothers, and this whole like so many of the problems that we have today. Like, oh, you think Iran is our biggest problem? Okay, well, did in Tehran in 1953 is a huge part of why the United States has
1979
ongoing.
happened.
Well, yeah, it's because of why that happened and just the ongoing relationship happened. Central America, the Dulles brothers, Saudi Arabia, the Dulles brothers. It's just, and even Vietnam for that matter, Dulles brothers, because Eisenhower was the first to get involved in there in any capacity. So,
Peace Panther says, does anyone know RFK Jr.'s ascendant?
No.
Another astrologer mentioned is Capricorn with a
Well, that other astrologer either needs to produce a document or otherwise they're making an astrological argument, which could be interesting if they're doing a rectification. But we don't. That a rectification can never be considered.
I mean, it seems like we had a lot of data for the Kennedy family. How do we not have
and
his?
he's one because he's born in D.C. and they don't record births in D.C. His father was already working for the McCarthy campaign at that point, and they were living in DC.
Huh. It well, I know. Well, I do know for a fact, though. I've had clients who were born in DC and they didn't have birth times on their birth certificates, but they did have birth times when they ordered their long form certificate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
So,
it would be great to have it for RFK if we could get it, but as things stand, we do not have it.
um, so BNL Dell says, are there any ramifications to the global fighting with either of those conjunctions? Well, I think there's some connections to the Ukraine war for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because
Um,
it basically started coming into that triple conjunction with Pluto.
right, and when it comes to the Israel-Palestine thing, I'm almost not really expecting another major development to occur until like we get to the eclipse, since the Libra eclipse seemed to figure in so prominently to the timing of when that sort of kicked off. So I'm sort of expecting that the next series of eclipse scenarios would be um, similarly sort of important. And actually, that set of eclipses should also be important for RFK Jr. because he announced his run close to that Aries solar eclipse back in 2023. And then he announced he was going to switch running as a Democrat to running as an independent, really close to the October Libra eclipse. And so
Mm.
we're going to have another eclipse in Aries for him. Um, so I don't know what house is happening in his chart, but I would assume that it's probably. I mean, from where we're at now, and just thinking about how this is going to go, I'd assume it's when he probably drops out or something. But who knows? Um, any thoughts on? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, B Havens is asking who the Dulles brothers are. Okay, so there were two Dulles brothers. There's John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State under Eisenhower, basically second in command, and then his brother Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA. Alan Dulles is suspect number one in the whole concept, the whole conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy. Um, John Foster Dulles and the two of them as a team were absolutely sort of the masterminds behind the attempted coup in Iran in 1953, the overthrow of the Guatemalan government in 1954. Just a lot of shenanigans, involvement in Southeast Asia and all kinds of facets, stirring up an eventual coup in Indonesia, the earliest sort of CIA machinations in Vietnam, the overthrowing of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, in the newly elected Congo. Um, oh, lost connection. Is my Wi-Fi going out again? You hear me?
No,
Okay.
yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay. So anyway, I hope that came across. The Dulles brothers are worth looking into. They had their grandfather was John Foster, who had been Secretary of State under Grover Cleveland in his second administration, and he oversaw the invasion and seizure of Hawaii. Uh, and then on their other side, their uncle was Robert Lansing, who had been Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson, and he was responsible for a lot of intervention in places like Nicaragua and Haiti in the 1910s. So, there's the Dulles brothers, there's Robert Lansing, there's John Foster. There's a whole family tradition of these secretaries of state. For both Republican and Democratic presidents, who have a history of what we call today American imperialism. They're really like the pioneers and the masterminds behind it. So yeah, this
Wait,
whole thing
like the
started.
airport? The
Yeah, yeah, like
airport
the
is,
airport. Yeah,
oh
yeah.
god.
Because John Foster Dulles died in April of 1959, while Eisenhower was still president, but he had been Secretary of State for all of the first term and most of the second. Then he resigned because he had health trouble and he died. And that airport was opening, and so that yes, Dulles Airport is named after John Foster Dulles. And there used to be a statue of him there, but they've hidden it. Apparently, it's like
No, it's a toilet. Well, that'd be more appropriate if it was, but yeah, that's this country has a real problem
This is,
with
geez, you know,
lionizing people
I
who don't need to be celebrated.
I also I love being the Canadian schooling Americans on their own history. I don't mean to be arrogant, but who am I kidding? Yes, I do. Um, playfully arrogant, I hope. But yeah, no, it's I think it's really important to know. Really, when you come down to it, there's a lot of things. There are things that we're very, very critical about the United States for doing, and a lot of them come down to CIA shenanigans that happened at the hands of the Dulles brothers. And when it's not them, it's either their uncle Robert Lansing or their grandfather John Foster. So it's crazy.
Well, as V Cubed says, God bless America. But it also looks like there's some people who would like a live stream about the Dulles brothers.
Okay. Yeah.
That
I mean, we
maybe
don't
is
have we
interesting.
don't have birth times for any of them, but
Okay.
I could take you through the astrology of all these different sort of international coups. I've got charts for all that stuff, so that's easily something we could do on a live stream sometime.
Oodles of coups.
Yeah, oodles of coups.
um what was
Okay, everyone's getting all pro Canadian. I'm an international citizen. I've lived most of my life in exile from my hometown, semi voluntarily, I'd say.
yeah.
Not much of a Canadian nationalist. So,
So Texas thoughts.
Texas thoughts. I put up Greg Abbott's chart earlier.
Right.
Let's see here.
I mean, really, I feel like Texas is probably going to be given where things sort of currently stand. It almost feels a little like they are going to be like the center, of whatever the kind of the other side is. That map that was sort of going around Twitter of like the states that signed on to in support of the letter that Abbott sent. I feel like that was kind of ominous. And of course, we know that series of eclipses the eclipse happened last year, and the eclipse is coming up in April. Makes the paths of totality for those eclipses do just happen to crisscross right over like San Antonio in Texas. And I really wish this is one of the things I'm wishing and hoping that we can do once we have more advanced research tools is to look at things like that, like the paths of eclipses and where they were visible, and seeing what connection eclipses being visible has to a place versus just their temporal location.
Sure. I mean, I have the astro mapping, and there is but I have found that like when we're looking, this happened when Chris and I were researching the eclipse episode on his show, that we didn't necessarily eclipse. So this is this total one. Yeah, see, that's the path of the April 2024 one. And then the other one is that one.
It was the October 2023 one.
Oh, that's right. Here we are. Yes, there we are. So that's the October 2023, and then the April 2024. They formed this crisscross across the country. But what I was saying is, what I did when I did the eclipse episodes with Chris, we did find that some eclipse paths, even though they coincided with some really important historical events, the eclipse path wasn't always anywhere near where the action was in terms of what we could discern. So, I mean, I am interested in this, and obviously the fact that we have these two successive eclipses crossing over Texas is really remarkable. But I've also just seen eclipses work of their own accord, even if the path wasn't anywhere close to where the action is. Mm-hmm. That's just the honest God, observation from the work.
I mean, I would definitely expect it to be a little more dispersed when you have a lunar eclipse, because a lunar eclipse is visible from anywhere. Whole half of the planet,
right?
So, which is interesting because in the tradition, the solar eclipse is supposed to be more relevant for like the fates of leaders, like individuals, and the actual eclipse path is very specific to a particular place. Whereas the lunar eclipses are supposed to be more about the effect it has on like large numbers of people, and the eclipse itself can be seen by
Right.
many, many more people.
Yeah.
It's sort of less specific to where you are on Earth. It's just like the half of the Earth you're on, basically.
Hmm.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting realization I had a few years ago about the different ways we look at eclipses. But I still think there's got to be something to that about where the eclipse happens versus where things happen, and maybe there's another reason why um, a different part of the world might be implicated by a given eclipse. But in any case, um, I know that you've done a lot of work with like looking at Uranus going through the mutable signs, and we know that the story of Texas kind of centers around like Uranus and Pisces, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah.
And so, and when we think of, well, obviously, you wrote the whole book, literally, you wrote the book on Uranus and Gemini. But even Uranus and Virgo and Uranus and Sagittarius, have their own um kind of importance for American history. Certainly, the '60s stands out not just for being Uranus and Virgo, but also Pluto
Yeah.
with Uranus, which is why we kind of remember that decade. You know,
In the
even
way that we do. In the way
yeah,
that we do. Yeah.
even in a century with like two world wars, the '60s somehow still stands out as like
Right.
the
And
really big one.
some of that is boomer nostalgia, but it isn't just that. I mean, it really
No,
was a huge, huge kind of turning point. Um, I mean, it's made, I was actually born in the decade. Okay, I only lived for a year and a half of it. I feel like I remember the '60s. My parents were hippies. Of course, what I'm really remembering is the early '70s when things were still kind of '60s-ish. My earliest memory is being on my dad's shoulders at an anti-war demonstration. And everyone's young, long hair, and yeah, the smell of pot smoke was, you know, uh, easily identifiable to me from a very early age because the scent was around. So yeah, I have that kind of memory of the '60s, but you're born in the late '80s for crying out loud,
yeah,
but you still like the '60s still sort of touch
that's what it.
you. Yeah.
Well, to me, that's what, like, when I see things like when I saw, Occupy Wall Street, when I see things like, Black Lives Matter, like I you know I just immediately connect that. I connect that like back to the civil rights movement, back to the new left, the youth uprising against the Vietnam War. Um, that's where you first see these kinds of images, like the military, shooting at or like spraying hoses at young people and young protesters. And so to me that's kind of
Yeah.
it's naturally kind of associated with like, yeah, it comes from that time. That's Well, and when you think about it, it's Uranus was conjunct Pluto in the '60s, and then when Uranus squared Pluto, that was in the late 2010s, and that's kind of when that all was coming about. It's like the next sort of narrative
Hmm.
spoke of that cycle of individual liberation, right?
Yeah.
The liberation of the individual and the
Yeah.
radicalization of progression of society. So it's as Tarnas kind of lays that all out in his book.
For sure. For sure.
um so yeah, to
I
me it you know and I love the music of the '60s as well. My I was lucky enough, I guess. My parents were huge Beatles fanatics. The first tunes I ever worked out on the piano, were from a Beatles songbook that we had.
Right.
I knew how they were supposed to sound, so I was able to kind of figure out, how to
It's
do it.
it's just striking to me because, like, in the time continuum, your relationship to the '60s is the same as mine would be to the 1940s.
Right,
But I grew up very similar to you in the sense that, like, the '60s was the beginning of history, and everything before was, like, back in the days when everything was black and white, right? I mean, I had the everything that mattered, like, started in the mid '60s when TV became colorized, and
right.
colored movies were a thing, and so I as a child I had this really sort of distinct sense, I mean crude sense of time where, like, the black and white world might as well have been in another dimension.
Right.
Like the
Yeah.
1940s might as well have been 1767. It was anything from that era. The 1940s, it's only in becoming an astrologer and well, a grown up and a reader that yeah, that the point comes home to me. We're like, oh no, the 1940s were just before you were born, essentially, or
Well,
before I was born.
and it kind of blows my mind thinking about like Gen Alpha now, like my kids now, like they're going to be like their ancient history eventually is going to be like 4K streaming video. Like
Yeah,
before,
yeah,
yeah, like we had this sort of convenient delineation of like black and white photos versus color, but like their past is still going to be as immediately accessible and vibrant to us as it is sort of now in the present moment. So
sure.
I think there's going to be a really strange relationship that future generations have to our moment.
Yeah, right. Sleeping
Um,
above me right now, my stepkids, twins who were born in 2002, never knew a world before 9/11. Like,
right.
uh, um, grew up in South Africa, but a decade after apartheid, and sort of so growing up in the midst of the aftermath of that.
They never
Um,
knew a world without the internet. They never
well,
knew
absolutely,
like
absolutely. Yeah.
it's just
Not just with it, never knew a world without the internet, never knew a world without like, Bluetooth and
right.
and Wi-Fi. So yeah, it's pretty kooky. I wanted to say there was quite the explosion of comments about the 60s. I think we have a lot of baby boomers in our audience. I really like V Cube seems to be really intent on pushing back on things we say. So I like the spunk and spirit. V Cube says our air in the US would be like New Delhi's or worse now if not for radical boomers, and many more species would be extinct. Um, okay, yeah. I wasn't trying to push too hard on boomers. I don't know, what did I say? I must have triggered something there.
Oh, that
I said something
the
about
thing the
boomer
60s is
nostalgia, but
yeah,
the I
describe
boomer
I don't
nostalgia, but that's not,
yeah, I don't think that's yeah, I don't think
I
that's what
qualified the statement in the statement. I said it wasn't just boomer
yeah, no,
nostalgia.
I and to be fair, like, while like the okay boomer memes were sometimes funny, like sometimes still kind of amusing, especially when I talk to my mom. Um ultimately I don't know, especially when you study astrology and you are studying a lot of history, you begin to um there's kind of a similar cast of characters in different eras.
Yeah,
And so you start to sort of recognize, oh, like these were like, oh, I kind of recognize myself, oh, the progressives of this era, like I probably would have been one of them. I wouldn't have been one of these people. Um or And I think, that's just something that's maybe in human nature.
Yeah, I
But
was I was speaking more to like we've all seen that same montage over and over and over again where it's like scenes of Vietnam with Jimi Hendrix is all along the watchtower playing like, in like decade after decade. And incidentally, All Along the Watchtower by Hendrix is one of my all-time favorite recordings of music. I can listen to it every day. But still, the fact remains it's also the soundtrack for this ongoing sort of loop of selected memories that become really sort of ossified, I think. So yeah, I wouldn't mind doing an episode like on the astrology of the 1960s. I love the 1960s. Um, and yeah, it's a bad mouthing the boomers was back in the 80s when I was an obnoxious young person. I would like literally that's the funniest part is like I was hating on boomers when I was an angry 14-year-old in 1982, not when I'm like, a 55-year-old man with like a
I'm not going to hate on
lo-
boomers reflexively. I think,
no,
where
no.
appropriate, sure. But otherwise, there's a lot you know, there's a lot I like about boomers too.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely.
so what was I gonna say? Oh, so taking this back to Texas, that's why
And that's how we
Texas
got here. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, well, so Texas then I'm really kind of thinking Uranus and Gemini, will be sort of that most
Mhm.
obvious trigger then for when shit gets real, because that's kind of what it's always done, and it connects back directly to some of Texas's history, vis-a-vis the square to Uranus and Pisces, and I think, well, and we were talking about the assassination of JFK. Where did that happen? Which state? Did that occur in? I just this particular place, this place, Texas, seems uniquely positioned to, um, function as kind of probably the center of whatever this new confederacy is. Um,
Yeah, look, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I hear you. I hear you. I mean, like you said, I wrote the book, and I'm anticipating trouble in the U.S. when Uranus goes into Gemini, and it's not a stretch to imagine that Texas winds up being in the center of all that. So yeah, it is what it is. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to know more about sort of Texan history. I know the big event, of course, I'm thinking of from Uranus and Pisces is like the Alamo.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. The
and
Texas American War and the
yeah,
Texas War of Independence is, well, depending on who you are, it will define what you call it. But yes, uh, um, that whole scenario back in the 1840s, 1830s, and 1840s.
well,
All right. Well, any other sort of thoughts? I think we're coming up to the end.
yeah. I guess. Well, so,
Alberta.
yeah, I
Yeah,
was
I
just about that comment.
yeah, I don't know. Canada can very easily splinter. This is okay. This is the one thing I'll say about Canada and the United States. The big irony with Canada and the United States is when the United States was founded, it was supposed to be a loose collection of independent states, and then a Uranus cycle later, you had the Civil War, and it became this very sort of centralized, unified nation. When Canada was founded right after the Civil War in 1867, it was supposed to be this centralized, unified foundation, and it in turn has become a loose association of independent states. And yeah, I don't know. There's not much holding the country together, really. And who knows what'll happen? It's not just Alberta that could go the same way as Texas. BC could go the same way. Quebec has always been trying to go the same way that, for as long as I've been around, at least. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that could bust up Canada. Any other thoughts?
Um, so wasn't there an act passed by Parliament that like divided Canada into like Lower Canada versus Upper Canada, the Constitutional Act of 1791?
Yeah, that's the beginning of Canada in a sense.
Do
After
you
after
have that date from 1791?
I believe I do.
Is that like March or February?
Let's see. Where's my Canada file?
Because I think I see something, which I think you will too once you find it.
Wheels in Watts's mind keep on turning. Let's see. Yes, here I am. It's December of 1791.
Oh, it's not. Oh, I thought it was March or February.
British Canada Constitutional Act comes in effect. Maybe it was drawn before that. Is that what do you have a different? This is when it came into effect.
Okay, so that's all right. So that's okay. Pluto and pretty late in Aquarius, though. I was just wondering I just knew it was like a Pluto and Aquarius event, I guess. I thought there might have been something more particular to the time frame we're seeing now, but
right. No, I mean
because in early 1791 we had like Venus, Mars, Pluto in Aquarius.
Oh, okay.
And, okay. So I was
wondering, but that's not here. But I mean, again, this isn't Canada isn't I mean, Canada is like occupied by the British Army, but it's not that what Canada doesn't have, like the US has and like South Africa has, is this big sort of like independence, like the lone settler heading out west and carving their own destiny. Canada didn't unfold in that way. It was totally like a government creation, an organized creation to build a railroad and keep Americans out basically of British owned land. So yeah, it's you. I wouldn't expect to see like a whole Venus Mars Pluto thing in the creation of Canada.
Mhm.
Um, what you're seeing there is, of course, during the Revolutionary War, you had loyalists to the, British loyalists, and they basically were rounded up and sent up to Montreal, where I'm from. So and the Mohawk Indians who had fought on the side of the British were also, thrown out off their lands in upstate New York, and they wound up in reservations off the island of Montreal. And so you have, that's what Montreal is sort of um, a product of the American Revolutionary War, where you suddenly had French-speaking and English-speaking peoples and Mohawk people, sort of all living in virtually on top of each other in an enclosed place, and that's Montreal in a nutshell.
Okay, yeah, the date I was getting was January 25th, 1791. British Parliament passes Constitutional Act of 1791, splitting
Okay,
the
so that's when they passed it. I
Upper and
had the
Lower
chart for
Canada.
when it went into effect. Okay,
Okay, yeah. So if you go to January 25th, 1791,
all right.
then you should see um
Right. Okay. With Mercury stationing retrograde, which makes sense
right.
because the thing would keep getting redesigned, of
Well,
course.
because I'm also thinking of the fact that like this is about splitting, this is about like dividing the
But
country
it's not it's
into
it's not
two
really
areas.
di yeah, it's not dividing. It's just no, no, there I would not take it as a division because what you're just establishing are 2 colonies, a French colony and an English colony. You're just reconfiguring territory and sort of consolidating it, in part because you have all these, British refugees coming up from, the United States, what's now called the United States after the Revolutionary War. That's really it. You're getting English people settling alongside French speaking people.
I
Uh,
mean, and there were never any problems after that.
Dude, it's literally the
Well,
literally
okay.
the guiding force of my life is the fact that that statement is completely false. I might not be an astrologer if it wasn't for that. I mean, I really, I became interested in astrology in 1995 as Quebec was heading into the second separation referendum, and it's entirely linked. It's entirely linked
So Venus conjunct Mars,
for me.
conjunct Pluto and Aquarius, then based on that sort of precedent, could also make sense for, well, how did you put it? Reorganizations of,
Reorganizations of territory. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
which could be very relevant then for, say, Israel and Palestine, or
Yeah,
a number of other scenarios that are about precisely this issue of territory.
that's right. That's right.
Wow.
All right, man. I think
All
I'm out
right.
of steam.
Okay, I'm out of steam.
Fresh out of steam, and nothing will drain me of steam more than thinking about Montreal and Canada. Uh, okay, who are you, Watson?
I am Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer. You can find out more about me and my services and my work at my website, patrickwatsоnastrology.com, and I'm available on most social media websites at pwatsonastro.
Fantastic. And my name is Nick Dagan Best. I also have a website, nickdaganbestastrologer.com. I'm available for all your astrological service needs and requirements. And yeah, be sure to remember to, if you're interested in our live stream, want to support us, become a patron. We have very interesting, exciting bonus features for patrons. So sign up and join us. Check out our website, theastrologylivestream.com. Check out our YouTube channel, also the Astrology Livestream. And yes, Dulles Brothers, of course. We will Oh, Astro Brain Fart says, wait, who from the two of you is the best at rectifications? We're both really good at it. So, wait, should we have
I
a
mean,
rectification off?
oh my gosh. I mean, well, Nick has been doing it for longer. So
Watson's
there's
really good.
that.
Watson's really, really good. I think you're in good hands with both of us.
Sure. Yeah.
Go with whoever you think is handsomer, or go with whoever you think is that you think you could tolerate for the amount of time it takes to rectify your chart. If you find one of us just too irritating for words, go with the other guy, or whoever's less irritating, even. You know, really, it's a personal thing. Certainly, it's no disgrace to be to have Watson chosen over me. So, all right,
Thank you.
good
That's very
stuff.
gracious of you.
Well,
And same for you.
thank you, thank you.
All right.
All right, fake humility moment over.
All right. Have a
Good
wonderful
stuff.
day, guys, and
Uh,
have a great February. And we'll see you actually next week.
yeah, we'll see you next week. We're doing Malcolm X. We're going to talk about the astrology, the life of Malcolm X. So yeah, today there was a little preview of that. Every month we do one episode about a political figure and one episode about an arts figure. So Malcolm's our political figure. Of course, in January, our political figure was Napoleon and our musical figure was Britney Spears. So you can see that we're really covering, any number of people, and we don't just have one kind of niche that we follow.
Oh, and we actually do know our arts figure for next. We will be doing.
Yes, we're doing Aretha Franklin, but I wasn't.
Okay.
I was
You
gonna
were gonna hold back.
I was gonna hold back, but yes. Our next two people in February are going to be Malcolm X and Aretha Franklin. Please do Trudeau one day. Yeah, maybe. I mean,
Which one?
well, Pierre, obviously. I mean, Justin still. I don't really want to do like contemporary.
Contemporary.
Yeah, I'd like. Pierre's got a lot of interesting things to him. We only have a vague idea of his time of birth, which is really unfortunate. When I used to be a bike courier in Montreal, I rode in the same elevator as the man a few times, because after he was prime minister, he worked at this law firm in downtown Montreal, and I used to ride around on a bike and deliver packages, and I'd be in the elevator with the former prime minister. But I wasn't an astrologer yet, so I didn't think to ask him. He was
Yeah,
a very
how
he
did
was
you
a very
not?
approachable guy. Actually, I did when I was 9. He did a press conference at my school, and I asked him they had a sort of, you line up at the microphone and ask the prime minister a question. And I was 9. I had only just learned about JFK. And so I asked Trudeau if he was afraid of assassination. And he had a great, politician's answer. He said, no, I think if the Canadian people don't like me, they'll just vote against me, or something to that effect. But I wish I had that footage. I can't find it. But
Wow.
there was a whole press conference. There were news cameras. They talked about it in the newspaper the next day and stuff. So anyway, all right, cool. Prince when it's Gemini season. Yeah, we're definitely going to do Prince. I've got the books of his that cover his recording sessions. I've got a number of biographies. If anything, we're going to hold off on Prince just because we want to do a really spectacular job on him. There's a lot of nooks and crannies that we can explore with his life. But yeah, we do have Malcolm X and Aretha Franklin on board. So if you're excited about that, stay tuned. And even if you if you have requests, we'll definitely be taking polls from patrons and what have you in terms of other subjects we cover. So yeah, if you want to have some input on the show, become a patron. All right, with that in mind, I guess we are done. He is Patrick Watson at patrickwatsоnastrology.com. I'm Nick Dagan Best at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. And have yourselves a terrific week. We will see you next Sunday. Peace out.
See ya.
Bye, Patrick.